Welcome, everybody. This is Pippa Dennitt, who has kindly joined me today to talk about my experience with Pippa. Pippa is a coach and a people specialist, and she focuses on strength within people. And I felt it would be a good thing for us to go through our experiences together, and how we connected and how Pippa helped not only me, but two of my other colleagues that we've acquired a walking packaging company, holiday company recently, and now that's helped us through that. So we'll get into it now, and we'll walk you through how we got together from there. So thanks for joining me, Pippa. Obviously we used Jimmy Armitage to sort of headhunt or to actually check out our general manager now, Emma Johnson, and he recommended that within that there is some areas that she could do with some improvement on, and that's why Jimmy then connected us with yourself. And can you just sort of tell us the journey from there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really nice to sort of be introduced to you through Jimmy, because those personal connections are always the most valuable, I find. As soon as you and I started talking, we connected in terms of our approaches to how we like to get things done, our approaches with people and those sort of things. And what I bring into a conversation is helping individuals and teams really understand what they're really good at and what they're not so good at. So whilst being a certified strengths coach might make it sound like I help everybody do fluffy stuff all the time, in actual fact it's a lot more about how do you make an impact. Are you aware of the impact you're having on other people, and how can you maximize your natural power, your natural strengths, your natural behaviors? The first part of that is always understanding that. And so to start that conversation with you in the first instance, and then with your colleagues, was really, really interesting. From my point of view, people normally come to me when they've got a team that might be a little bit dysfunctional, or perhaps they're struggling where to go next and think about how to improve their performance. With bringing you guys together, it was actually about forming this new team, which is a really exciting way to start, because right from the start, you managed to, through the strengths process, you managed to sort of shortcut the conversations that you would normally have around getting to know one another. What was your experience in that sort of area, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, my first experience was you sent us an email, didn't you? And on that email was a list of questions. Was there 40-some questions?
Yeah.
And it times out as well, doesn't it? So which caught me out, because the first three it timed out. It's like, well, what am I doing? Because that sort of sent me into a bit of a tailspin. But the questions are actually quite from one extreme to the other, aren't they? And it wants you to sort of allocate yourself accordingly within that what that question means. And I found that quite difficult. And actually, when I got to the end, I emailed you, didn't I, and sort of said, I don't think I've done this right, because I was trying to give you something of me, and I found it quite difficult to do that. But then you sent me an email back and said, look, that's fine. That's normal. That's okay. We'll have a chat. We'll sit together. We'll go over it individually. And when I did that with you, Pippa, it sort of started to make sense, because when you categorised me in my top 5, from the competitive that one sort of threw me a bit, because I don't consider myself to be that way. But then you explained it in a different way that sort of aligned with it and sort of completely made sense. And you did that for the remaining 5, which we focused on at that time, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really interesting, because this is the Gallup strengths assessment. It's the Clifton Strengths assessment. It's done through Gallup, and they're really well known for their research across the world. And they're also really well known for being the sort of the founding fathers, if you like, of this strengths-based approach. So they spend a lot of time defining these questions and refining them. And it's quite a long list of questions. And you're right, you do sort of feel like you're being pushed in one way or the other. But by going through that manages to sort of bring to the top your most natural ways of being, or more importantly, your most natural ways of thriving. So that, your thing there about competition, it's a really interesting strength, because actually often people think that if they're highly competitive, it's about crushing everybody else in order to win. But the way Gallup define the competitive strength is that it's actually about being amongst the best. So there's a sense of judgment in there. There's a sense of being able to measure where one thing might be better than another. So rather than actually crushing everybody else, it's much more about seeing who is really good and then working out a way to get there. So yeah, it's a different take, and that's something that I often come across with many of the different strengths. Is the really important bit is helping people understand what the information is telling them, and that process of sort of really figuring out what does that mean for you as an individual.
Yeah, super. Because I've just picked mine up whilst he was talking. So competition, positivity, developer, self-assurance, and maximizer was my 5 areas of strengths that came out. And like I say, you walked me through those. And I think that's the value to that coaching that you gave me, because it's all right having a header as to what you fall under, but it's then actually understanding that, which was the important part. And then clearly so you spent some time with me, didn't you, first off, because I was the first one to get there. And then I went down and joined the other 2. And then you got another victim in your room and went through with them.
That's it.
So can you talk us through the Steve and Emma one then? Just give us a bit of insight as to how that went with them. What did they feel? What you thought?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the strengths-based approach always starts with self-awareness. So, we could leap straight into looking at your team's strengths and how you all sort of match one another. But actually, the real value in the first place is looking internally and thinking about yourself. And what we're really providing here is a language to be able to talk about, well, these are the things that I naturally do really well. And because of that, these are the things that I'm naturally not going to do really well. It's about thinking about how our strengths are actually really closely connected to our weaknesses. And so, yeah, it was really interesting talking that through with Steve and with Emma. And we talked about some of the similarities between the 3 of you, but also a lot of the differences. On a one-to-one basis, it's really heavily focused on, well, if, for example, positivity, one of yours is a really high strength for me, that's naturally going to make me always see options and always look on the bright side and know that there's a way through things. And also it might mean that I'm less likely to ask for help because, do you know what? I know everything's going to be okay. So figuring that out in a team context is really, really helpful. And so that's where we start to see the connection between our strengths and our weaknesses. They're generally not 2 separate things. And both Steve and Emma really sort of lent into that as we explored their strengths and thinking about, well, what makes them unique and how do they trip themselves up? Because do you know what? We're all human. We all do it every day. The real power of this is being able to see it more quickly and then be kind to ourselves when it's happening. And then what that brings into the team scenario when we bring everybody together, because having had those one-to-ones with both Emma and Steve, we then all came together, didn't we, and spent some time looking at well, what does that mean when the 3 of us work together? What was your take on that?
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. I mean, first off, I understood myself more from sitting and going through it with yourself, but then having 2 colleagues that I've not really spent a lot of time with. It's definitely Emma. I mean, it's more been a virtual thing with Emma. And to actually meet her, that's the first time I actually met face to face. So then understand her strengths really and Steve's strengths was, I suppose, it's like a shot in the arm. We sort of, and I think you was quite excited about it as well, wasn't you? Because it, like you say, normally it's about there's some problem within a team that you can go and sort of work on and fix. Whereas for us, there wasn't a problem. We were just getting going, and it was interesting to all. Naturally, when you're talking to somebody, you can find that that they've got some strengths in certain areas, the way they present themselves, the way they're doing what they do. But to then have it sort of confirmed that that's what they are. This is why they are. What helped the 3 of us out is that it sort of accelerated that bond straight away, so that we knew who could bring what to the table, because that naturally is what they do, and then we can then support that behind. So it's a big eye opener that to me, Pippa, to be honest with you.
Yes, yeah, and it generally tends to be. And what's fascinating is that, and I always tell everybody this, is that when I'm working with you one to one or in a team, one to one, I'm probably not going to tell you anything you don't already know about yourself, but we will certainly make a lot of connections that you wouldn't naturally make between sort of strengths and weaknesses. And then when it comes to teamwork, when you've already worked with somebody for a long time, I won't tell you anything you don't already know about them. But what you are gifted straight away, and in your case, it was a real accelerator, you're gifted a language to be able to have that conversation. So you then naturally talk about, well, this is what makes us similar. So you have that bond around where you've got similar strengths. And also, this is what makes us different. And then in the team session, we really explore, well, how do we maximize those differences? How do we bring them to the table? What is it that each person uniquely brings to a team that can really make a difference? It's interesting because it almost feels a little bit like you're putting people in boxes, but that's about the last thing you're doing, because with 34 different strengths, there's 1 in 33 million chance that somebody else will have the same top 5 as you in the same order. So what we're actually doing is really appreciating the uniqueness of people and then being able to have a conversation around that. And the language of this is really where the power comes from. One of the things that we move into in the team strength session that we did is then how can we use that knowledge in how we frame questions. And we talked a little bit about how naturally we would frame questions from our point of view. And when you think about how somebody else can best absorb a question, you can really help accelerate how they get to really use their strengths to give you maybe a different answer than the one you might have come up with yourself. What was your take on that part of it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also you raised the positivity side, because we're 3 of us are very positive.
Yes.
And
yeah.
And that's great, like you said, but you've got to also look at behind that as well, because we're going to move forward with this positive, everything's going to be fine. But you've made me definitely stop and think, hang on a minute, well, what if it isn't actually? And actually in meetings after we met with you, I think at the end of September, wasn't it? We
Yes.
met in Peterborough. After that, in correspondence with the other 2, we do take stock now of well, let's not just run, to fast forward. Let's just take stock of how that's going to be implemented, how that's going to affect us accordingly, if it doesn't go the way we think it's going to go. Because, as you know, in business, anything can happen. I mean, we were talking before we came on, weren't we, about a person, it's somebody that's close to my family that's in hospital and how that can affect things. So, I've had to shift my calendar around the last few days to sort of then support that side of it. So anything can happen in business, yes. and if it does, then you need to be giving it thought, as opposed to this positive future. Everything's going to be great. It will be fine.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. It's about recognizing, when you're in a team, some voices are going to be louder, and that's not necessarily about personalities. As you say, where you've got 3 of you who all have positivity in your top 10, you're naturally all going to believe that everything's going to be fine. And once you're aware of that, you can acknowledge that that's going to be a natural part of your conversations. And then, as you say, you also need to perhaps think about what are the quieter voices in the room. What because that's such a loud voice, all 3 of you are going to be in that space. What are the voices that you might not hear? And so then you can look to, well, okay, if we're all really positive, who is it that's checking in and saying, well, are we sure about that? How do we know that? How is that? How can we prove that? And so, yeah, it's helpful for understanding the dynamics of a team, and also really being deliberate about how you use where the gaps are. Looking at, perhaps if you've got 2 out of 3 have one strength, and that's going to be a relatively loud voice. And sometimes those 2 might need to say, well, hang on a minute, let's stop and hear from the third person in a particular area, because there'll be different strengths coming in. It's not about telling you what to do with it, but it's about giving you the tools to be deliberate about how you use your strengths.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because people are naturally their strengths are in one way. And it makes sense then, in a discussion point, whatever you're talking, is to look to utilise those strengths that they have, or the opposite side, like you've just said, so they can look at it from different perspectives. But the big thing that came out from all of us was communication. One of the things that we all took from that was a good line of communication. And within some correspondence from the exiting business owner, last week. There's a request that went through, and clearly they looked at it completely different to what it was meant to be. And I think you can get that a lot in emails, correspondence, that type of thing. And it caused this upset. And it wasn't until a conversation was had that it was, they'd seen it this way. It clearly wasn't. It was that way, and it sorted out straight away. They was fine with that, but they couldn't understand it up until that point. So communication definitely, not just between the three of us, but across the whole company. I mean, we got a meeting with them face-to-face next month, but we did a virtual meeting with them all to welcome them on board, everything else, and yet again, it was trying to be clear with our communication, because obviously they didn't know this was happening. It was a surprise to them. They were shocked. They had concerns, worries, what's going to happen, and all this type of thing. So, you have all these people that are on this tenterhook, sort of thinking, what is going to happen to them, and it was good that the three of us reacted in the way we did to make sure that they felt comfort that how we're going to move the business forward. And obviously Emma's doing a great job there now as the GM. And everybody's, we're starting to now uncover things, weaknesses within the business, and the strengths within the business. And we're starting to then look at how and what we do in respect of that. And the rest of the staff are coming on that journey with us. So that's another positive to sort of understanding ourselves, and then working with the three, and then working with the rest of them. So it permeates down. That's what I'm trying to get to.
It really does. And it's really interesting, because once you understand your own strengths and the impact you have, you get really deliberate about how you use that. And that does affect everybody around you. And that was a really nice example there, because when you're going through, M&A, you're in that space of, you might be working on a deal for weeks, months, for 6, 8, 12, 18 months, whatever it is, in order to get to that point. And it's very easy as you cross that line to not keep your eye on the fact that actually a lot of the people who are directly affected might not even have a clue that this is coming. And so in that environment, again, coming around to positivity, you're in that space of excellent, it's all going to be fantastic, and we can really see where things are going. There's a lot going on here. And sometimes the people who might feel under threat in that scenario, that's the last thing they want to hear. They actually want to hear, well, hang on a minute, what about me? What about my issues? Who's listening to me? So really appreciating that is a fundamental thing. That sort of recognition that other people are on a different journey, they're in a different space, is always really highlighted in that acquisition space. I come across it so much. One of the things that I find really interesting in the strength space is that as you sort of get more used to your strengths, you appreciate that how you see things is different to everybody else. And we all know that anyway, but you really get to be deliberate about why it's different. And a great example for that is, for example, my number one strength is learner. So I can look at a set of data, acquisition data, for example, and my first thought is always, what can I learn from this? I know that about myself. That's great. Somebody else who has maybe achiever as their number one strength, what they're going to be thinking is, how's this going to help me get things done? And so my answering my learner question doesn't help them out at all. And so I have to then think about, I understand my strengths, but what are their strengths? And as I get to grips with that, just rephrasing a question into a slightly different way can really help them engage and really help them feel that I see them and I know where they're coming from. So actually, when you understand your own strengths, that next level that you're talking about there of starting to see other people's strengths and use it around you, it really helps the space between people. I always say there's very rarely problems in people, the problems are between people. And that's exactly that communication piece that you're talking about. And using the language of strengths really helps us accelerate and connect on that level.
Yeah, and it got quite sort of tense about halfway through the meeting. You could tell that these questions are getting more sort of deep, I suppose, want to put it. But I just said, has anybody got any questions on sport? Because I'm really good at answering them. And just to put something like that in the room to spin that meeting around, it just calmed the things down. I'm a little bit of I can't swear, but I muck about like that, purposely to try and change the environment in which you're in, because what I find is that people can naturally gravitas to negativity and concern and so forth, than actually see the positivity side of it. So that actually did quite well. Everybody sort of calmed down a bit and started to then we start to have a better open discussion as to how things are going to move moving forward. And
Interesting.
Cool.
That sort of move towards negativity, that's a really human thing. You know, the human brain is designed to keep us alive, so it focuses on the threats, and helping people work through that is really good. The real art, you know, and positivity is a great one for that. Bring in something light-hearted, bring in the humour, because that enables us to just sort of look at things slightly differently and realise that we're not actually under threat, but we've got perceived threats that we really want to respond to. I love that. It's a great example.
I'm not very good on sport, by the way. I just like to use it. Well, look, thank you, Pippa. I really appreciate you agreeing to this, and I'm sure anybody watching this is going to get a load of amazing information and an understanding of something they didn't before. It's really helped us out, and we will be utilising you, as you know, moving forward in other acquisitions that we're doing. And it's just a great way of getting a step forward instantly, as opposed to trying that time of learning each other and how does this person work and how does that person work. You've just got a shot in the arm, like I said earlier on, to be able to to move that acquisition forward at a greater pace. So thank you, Pippa, really appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Bye.